Thank you so much to Steve and Jason for having me, and thank you all for sticking around. I know the last one of the day is, and following Grace, I was back there. It was actually really good for getting me chill for this performance, her performance for my speaking. So as he said, I co-founded BlogHer in 2005. We have employee number 1 or 2 back here, Christy Samus, who spoke earlier today. And we were acquired in 2014, and I stuck around for quite some time, but towards the end of 2016, I knew it was time for me to move on, and my plan was to, write some business book and try to get out there and figure out what I wanted to do next. And I spoke to the company about transitioning to being a part-time consultant for the first half of 2017, and this was the week before the election. So I had a confidence or a feeling of what the world might be like in 2017 that didn't really turn out. 1 week later, we knew we were in for a wild ride and a lot of uncertainty. And at the same time, a longtime friend of mine named Carolyn Gerin from San Francisco, she reached out to me the day after the election and she asked me how I was doing. And I was like, curled up in the fetal position, how about you? And she says, I had a dream last night. I had a vision and I want you to join me. I'm like, okay, what's that? And years ago, she had written a book that I bought before I knew her when I got engaged, which was called The Anti-Bride Guide. And it was all about if you wanted to get married without buying into the wedding industrial complex. It was very actionable and digestible and all of that. And she said, we need to do a guide like that, but for protecting our democracy and for giving people a way to know that they can do that. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Can we add a third co-author and bring more diverse perspectives so that we're really reaching out across, more populations? And so I invited a friend of mine who's a really amazing millennial writer, feminist, advocate named Jamia Wilson. And I said, do you want to join this project? And she's like, sure. So we did it and that's how BlogHer was too. We were just sort of like, you want to do this thing? Yeah, let's do it. Without a lot of forethought. And then we just kind of kept going after it. And what we all saw, and a lot of what I did throughout BlogHer was simply listen to community. And what I was hearing out there was that people were fired up. They were really, some freaked out, some really impassioned, some really motivated, but it was just all this energy. And I was seeing it not just from people like me who had been sort of paying attention to politics and activated in small ways for years, but people who had never so much as, they voted, and if they voted, that was like doing their civic duty. And now all of a sudden they were like making signs and going on the street, and they were joining groups, and they were calling their congresspeople, and I thought 2 things. I thought, this is amazing. And I thought, I'm so scared this is all going to flame out because politics is such a long game. And so I really thought we're all fired up and ready to go, as someone I admire once said. And but where do we go from here? And I felt like what I saw during the campaign and the election and all of that was also that there was a lot of fundamental misunderstanding about where shit happens and how shit happens. One of the things is, if you're worrying about what's happening at the federal level, by the time it gets there, it's too late. It has been inculcated at the local and state level. I'll give you one example that's very important to me. I feel like if we don't fix gerrymandering and voter suppression, we won't have a democracy. And a lot of people focus on the Voting Rights Act, and that was a horrible blow to the Voting Rights Act that the Supreme Court did during the Obama years. But actually, since 2012, since Obama was reelected, 38 states have passed voter restriction laws at the state level. There's all sorts of ways they do it. Leave aside the whole issue of felons not voting, which is a whole other form of suppression. They are passing laws, and they're able to do it because these are states run by, I'm just going to be a little political and say red governors and red legislatures, even in states that have blue-leaning populations, because our turnout sucks so bad. In the midterms, in the primaries, the most impassioned people show up, and unfortunately, the right side of the aisle has more passion at that level and shows up more consistently. So if we don't fix what's happening at the state level, we won't, it's too late, right? And there's many examples of this, of things. The second reason the state and local level matters is because that's the pipeline. Where, if anyone's sitting around saying, where are the great candidates? They're in city councils and school boards and county board of supervisors and state legislatures and state senates and yes, governorships and lieutenant governorships. So it's actually right where you are. Now people say, oh, politics is for the elite. I can't be involved. Have you ever gone to a local political meeting? They're desperate for your participation. The reason people hang out and roll so long is because no one else is signing up to do it. I will tell you about, I was once my assembly district's representative to the Democratic Party State Executive Board. That sounds super impressive. You want to know how I got that role? I showed up at a meeting where there were 18 people and no one else would do it. They said, who wants to run? You had to vote in that meeting. Those 18 people were going to decide. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was it. And I live in a super blue county, in a super blue state, in Silicon Valley, like super populated, and 18 people were there. So at the local level, you can get involved. But the thing is, it's not even all about government, right? And that's the other thing I think people really lose sight of. So many institutions impact our day-to-day lives in ways that are sometimes way more direct and personal than what happens at the federal level. And what I'm talking about is your own backyard, your workplace, your schools, your city and county government, your media, local media on up, and the businesses and investments you have. So here's something I learned while researching the book. Did you know that you only have to own $2,000 worth of a company's stock to be allowed to put a shareholder resolution into their annual meeting? $2,000. That's like 20 shares of Apple in some cases. So you have a power that you don't even realize in some of the day-to-day ways that you are walking in the world. At school level, why does it matter? But decisions are made from very early on. And if you're worried about things like bias and school to prison pipeline, and who gets on what track in life? Where do you think that happens? It happens at the school level. And sometimes it happens right down to the principal of your school. So let's talk about, say, inequitable dress codes. Sometimes that's just a school decision. Sometimes it's a school district decision, in which case those school board meetings are open to the public and usually not very packed until there's something people get really emotional about. The other thing is you might not realize that city and county governments, yes, you run for mayor, you run for city council, you run in my county for county board of supervisor. They have, I'll just take this area, Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, there are dozens of commissions that are not elected, they are appointed. Planning Commission, Library Commission, Juvenile Justice Commission, on and on, Women's Rights Commission, on and on and on and on. These are appointed positions that a lot of those people got because they just went to the commission's meetings. Most of the people I interviewed for the book just decided, oh, I'm really interested in this. And they started going to the meetings, and therefore they met the people. And when there was an opening, they were appointed. And these are working commissions. They do things. So one of the examples I like to give is my friend Courtney McAvinta, who runs the Respect Institute, which is all about helping young boys and girls develop self-respect. She wanted to join the Juvenile Justice Commission. And that, in the time she's been on it, they changed the age that kids get sent from juvie to adult prison from 18 to 20. So they bought 2 more years for those kids. And the figures on recidivism between juvie and adult prison, there's a vast difference. So she's made an impact on real people's lives. And now the next thing they're working on is developing curriculum for those 18 to 20 years old, because they used to just stop at high school, and now they need to have more advanced curriculum. So she didn't run for office. She didn't spend any money. And she's working on stuff that she really cares about and she's really passionate about. So the other big topic that I'm worried about, though, is Work-life activism balance. I actually hate work-life balance as a topic. You know, Christy's probably heard me complain about it like a million times, like no one asks dudes of how they do it all and stuff like that. Whenever I interview guys, and I interviewed a lot of guys on stage, and I always ask them, so you do this, you do that, you do this, how do you do it all? And inevitably the women in the audience laugh, like, ha. But, you know, I get an answer, so that's just a total side note. So what I'm worried about is how do we keep going? Because when I look at my friends, they're so, and I'm with them, right? They're so worked up all the time. Every day there's some new thing. And every day there's some new urgency. And imagine sustaining that. I think people have November 2018 in their sights, and they're just thinking they can keep going until then. But November 2018 isn't going to fix everything. It's not going to fix everything at the federal level, and it's not going to change the fundamental problems at the state and local level about things that you care about. So, how do you keep going? Well, there, I think, are 4 dimensions of activism, sustainable activism. And the first is your passions. Now, I sat down and I said, okay, what are all the things I care about? And I listed these things in about 10 minutes. Now, I will tell you about a blind spot. It took me till the next day to realize, because I don't have kids, I hadn't put, where is it, education or student debt. Did those things all go on there? Did they all fill in? Yeah, they did, okay. So I hadn't put all of those, I hadn't put those 2 things on my list because it was my blind spot. I thought of it later. And so, you know, but I think that's instructive. Like, I'm not gonna, as much as I may say intellectually, student debt is out of control, or, oh, education issue is really important. Clearly, that's, for me to have sustainable work-life activism balance, that's not what I'm gonna focus on, as important as I think they are. I gotta figure that some of you have a very personal connection to it. And as the collective, some of you are going to be working on that. Do you see any other blind spots? Did I miss anything else up there? Oh, this might be the old version of the deck. That's why those aren't there. Any other blind spots? Wow, all right. That is definitely a blind spot of mine. What else? The arts, nice, nice. Homelessness, and it's a huge problem in San Jose where I live. Human trafficking. I heard something over here. Food, and to me it's food insecurity. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Education, yeah, I did do a version where I had that, I think. What? Prison reform. I have that somewhere, criminal justice reform. Yeah. Yes? Oh, that's a scary one. I didn't even put I have war there. Okay, so that covers all the wars. Nuclear, bio, it covers all the wars. I have climate change up there. Sustainability, what kind? Yeah. So I'm going to encourage you all to identify what are your top 3. I know it's hard, and I know you'll feel like a bad person when you abandon the other 20. We can care about many, many things. But in order to build a sustainable, you're going to be an activist, you're going to be engaged, you're going to be fired up without really tearing yourself down and without flaming out and burning out and therefore tuning out, you're going to have to triage your passions, and you're going to rank them. I think you have to rank them, and you have to know. And it can change. You know, it can change over time. But I think you have to know what is the thing that 5 years from now, I will get up in the morning and feel just as deeply about and be just as motivated about to go to work for as I did today. And I think that's the first step to sort of building your profile for work-life activism balance. The second step is to think about your skills. So last fall, I went and I phone banked. And how many of you have phone banked with the Robo Calling tool? Where, okay, I don't know, a lot of you said you were extroverts, so you might not relate to this. But here's what happens. You sit in a room, and there were like 80 other people in there, so there's a constant noise of all these other people. And you are staring at a screen. And I phone banked in the last couple weeks before the election, so by then a lot of people have been called and a lot of people have been recorded. So they are trying to feed you only people who are registered in your party, who are, who they believe. They're not trying to set you up to talk to people who are going to like curse you out and hang up on you, right? They're trying to find people who reasonably would want to talk to you about the issue you're phone banking about. But there's silence, except for all this ambient noise. And then there's silence, and you're watching the screen. And there were sometimes gaps of 11 minutes. I mean, it was 3 minutes, 8 minutes, 5 minutes, 11 minutes, 2 minutes. So you wait for an undetermined amount of time in silence looking at a blank screen until something pops up. You have like a millisecond to process who you're talking to, because you're supposed to say, "Hi, Mr. Smith." And it pops up in front of you, and there's a voice, and you have to like go into your thing and talk to them. And I found it like physically painful. I was just like, "Oh, please, nobody answer. Oh, 1 more minute, no one answered. Thank you." I mean, I just felt like, I don't know what's happening, and it's just terrible. And then when a whole bunch of us went, and the one friend who was the most reluctant to go is a total extrovert. And when the rest of us were like, "Okay, we're done, we're exhausted, we're drained," she's like, "Really? This has been so fun." And I was like, "You're insane." And she was the one who didn't want to go, but she loved it. So I'm never doing that again. I don't care. Nobody can guilt me into it. I found that horrifying. But there's a lot of other things I can do. And these are just some examples. They're not even all the examples. But understanding your skills is really important. I understand now I don't want to phone bank. And you know what? I'm not going to door knock either, because it's the same problem with, people might be there and I might have to talk to a person. And also, thinking about the time versus money. Somebody last night was talking about time versus money, and it was Everett. And I was laughing because that's a thing in our book, the whole time versus money equation. The less time you have, the more money you should give. The less money you have, the more time you can give. Like finding the way you can contribute doesn't depend on you being rich, and it doesn't depend on you having a lot of leisure, because both those things matter, right? And are you a great writer? Not only can you write letters to the editors, but did you know that almost every legislation, and this is now at the federal level, every legislation, once it passes, all they've done is set guidelines. Something ought to happen. And here's the law. Now what the executive branch does, and this is why it matters so much that all of these departments are being so decimated, the executive branch departments are the ones that go figure out, how are we going to enforce this? How are we going to implement this? What is the plan going to be? And they take public comment on the execution of every law that passes. And I think people know that when something big comes along, like, let's say net neutrality, and we all know to go comment. But it happens with every law. You can pick your topic you're passionate about, and you can go, there's a government site where you go, and you can sort it by topic. You can also sort it by urgency, meaning which one has a deadline coming up soon. So if you're a writer, writing public comments can be really a great way to get your message out there. You can fundraise, you can use your social media that has its significance. And for those of you who are wondering, well, hey, my congressperson totally votes the way I want them to, so what difference does it make? Having spoken to my congressperson, who does vote pretty much the way I want her to, what she said is twofold. The first is that they use the data. They come to the floor saying, well, I got 8,000 calls, so there's a groundswell out there. But the other thing she said is, governing is compromise. Everything we're doing is negotiating and compromising. And I have to use my feedback from my constituents to understand the priorities they have. So I might always vote the way you want, but if I don't know that people care about something, that may be the first thing on my compromise list. So it matters. The other thing is the right skills aren't always the same for different tasks. So how many of you have ever checked out Indivisible? So they know what they're talking about when it comes to Congress. They're all former staffers, and it's all about how to most influence Congress. And their whole thing is phone call first. Well, actually, in person first. Like if you go to Washington, you can make an appointment to see your congressperson. That's their job. You can also go to see them when they're local. They have town hall meetings. I've been going to those since the election. It's really pretty trippy. I had never been, I'm not like some great activist. I hadn't been to one before, so I'm just like anybody else, got super fired up. So you can call them, you can see them. The next best would be to use like ResistBot, if any of you are familiar with that, which kind of, it takes texts and turn them into faxes right into their office, and postcards. Do not send your congressperson a letter because they get sent somewhere to be checked for anthrax, and so they're never going to be timely. Because there's a backlog, of course, because there's not enough workers. However, when I interviewed some media people for the book and asked them, should you call, should you write? They were like, oh, don't call a media outlet and give them your complaint. Some intern will take your information, but it's pretty meaningless. You know what media execs really pay attention to is social media, what is trending. We can say that's good or bad, like I have feelings about that, but you know, they're paying attention to what's trending, they're paying attention to what people, the groundswell of people are talking about. So their recommendation was to focus more on that. So the skills for the tasks matter. Like sometimes you're better off focusing a different way. And the last thing is urgency versus strategy. So I know people who really lose it when they're asked to do something different every day because today that thing is urgent. Like I can't be whipsawed around like this. Every day is something different. I just feel like I'm not doing anything lasting, anything strategic. It's all just reactive. It's all just totally letting someone else drive my agenda. It drives them crazy. I know other people are like, that's like 6 months from now. This is happening today. How can I worry about that? Like cross that bridge, man. We got to fix this now. Each of you are going to have your own calculus of how much you focus on the urgent versus the strategic. I think for most people, it's going to be a balance of those things. You do a little of both, you know. But it's really worth examining, ranking your passions, understanding your skills, learning what skills apply to each potential avenue of communication, and you know, figuring out how much you want to work on stuff that's really important today versus how much you want to work on stuff that is a little more forward thinking and a little more long term. And I do think sometimes working on the local and community stuff is more strategic, it's more long-term, it's thinking about the pipeline, it's thinking about, you know, what happens as that ladders up to state policy and federal policy. But it's pretty foundational. And the last thing I will say is that I think I like to, I coined this little portmanteau, Tractivism. We all know about like gamifying websites, and that there's people like to have milestones and people like to have rewards, and we all learn how to use this in certain aspects of what we do. And I think we should use it to encourage ourselves to maintain our work-life activism balance. There are, you know, because I think it becomes very easy to say, what good is it? Every day there's something new, nothing's happening. But things do happen. And first of all, sometimes the thing that happens is that nothing happens. So sometimes what happens is that this thing didn't pass, or that policy didn't go into effect. I mean, how many times did they try to repeal healthcare? They failed because of people activating, and then they snuck it into that tax law, parts of it. But, you know, a lot of times the success is in what you prevent, especially if you're in a minority or, you know, you're not the majority position. So a lot of what you accomplish sometimes is in what you prevent. But understanding the results of what you've done, and understanding that that matters, and keeping track so you can feel a sense of accomplishment, I think is important to every person, to feel like they're actually achieving something. There's so many tools out there to help you activate, to remind you to activate, to help you track how you activate. There's so many. I just put some resources here. I hope they will share the deck. There's so many ways that you can organize yourself. First of all, that you can educate yourself, and then secondly, that you can organize yourself to activate. Like how many of you use ResistBot? Oh, see, this is one of my favorites right now, because, you know, it just nudges me every day. It sends me a little text and says, oh, don't you want to say something to your Congress people today? And I'm like, okay. And if you don't have an idea for a topic, they're like, you know, text topic if you want some ideas about What's a text about? I'm like, okay. And most days I don't need it. Most days I'm like, rawr. But but some days I'm like, I'm so rawred out. I need a nudge. I need some help. So that's one of my favorites. I also include the party, and by the way, Democrats.org and GOP.com, those sites are the gateway to learning about all this state and local stuff. Both those sites have a link to every state party in the union. And then if you click to the state party, every state party site has a link to all the county committees in the union. So you can drill down and find where you want to activate. Your local political party, that's one thing to understand, is that at the national level, there's a lot of things that don't happen up there for political parties. They don't determine, like most parties decide to piggyback with a state's primary system to save money and because it's easier. But they don't determine when primaries happen. They don't determine voter laws about how many hours voting locations are open, how many polling locations there are. There's a whole bunch of stuff that the parties, even though they're using this system, it is the state local government that determines those things. And then at the county level is where things happen, like all the volunteers to run a polling place come at the county level. They're not, so there's like all this, just like the three branches of government, the political parties work kind of the same way. There's different things happening at every level. So starting at the national and like clicking down and clicking down and clicking down, you can find the email and phone number for every single one of your local party's representatives and committee members. You can find out what volunteering efforts they're looking for. You can find out a ton of stuff. So you can activate through your city or county government, but you can also activate through your county committee of the party you belong to. So you have a lot of choices about how to activate. So I think the main thing I just want to encourage people to do is think about this as a long haul. It didn't take just a year to get to where we are. It was decades. Right? And I don't mean to sound discouraging, but it's going to take time. If you have strong things you feel passionate about and you want to help make a change, it is very, very hard to move these gears overnight. So understanding how you can manage your passions, manage your energy, manage your frustration, manage all of this stuff, and really making a plan for yourself, and then keeping track of how much you accomplish. And I do recommend, there's so many local groups now you can join. Doing it with other people is often a great way to be accountable. That's the way to sort of, and think of it as something you're gonna build into your life going forward. We've seen what happens when a lot of the populace is complacent or feel disengaged, one or the other. And I think we're now seeing what happens when a populace basically says we're gonna rise up. And so I hope you will get on that path of work-life activism balance for the rest of your life.
Thanks.